Hi, most people call me JP, you can go with whatever works for you. So yeah, for the last year I've been working, I've been at LEGO for the past 3 years. This is my final week at LEGO, so I'm leaving to take some time out and do some different bits and pieces and work out what the next thing is. And in the past year, I've been leading what we call emerging platforms and partnerships there, which is looking at, amongst other things, voice and particularly conversational AI, voice being one of the main ways in which people are interacting with that across a number of our different properties. And we launched several projects in the past year across Facebook Messenger, across Alexa, and a couple of projects coming to market before the close of this year for Google Assistant as well as trying some other things internally and messing around with some different ideas around the blockchain and how that might also solve some of the problems. And before that, at LEGO, I spent 2 years helping be a part of the core team that built LEGO Life, which is the kids' social network that we launched at the start of 2017, which has now grown to over 2.5 million kids using it worldwide in 27 different countries, and is a secure, safe place for kids to share their LEGO creations and the stuff that they love about LEGO with one another. So that's been what I've been doing. And outside of that, for the past 6 months or so, we've been growing this community of voice practitioners and people that are interested in the industry in the UK, in a group called Voice 2, which started out as a WhatsApp group that's got out of all levels of control from where I originally started. I know a number of you in the room are already in it, which is great. Thank you for those of you that have been participating and adding to the conversation. And our aspiration is to grow the practice of building voice-first experiences amongst people here in the UK and beyond. So increasingly it's becoming a global community of practitioners. Apparently I was hearing from Sinna earlier that we're very big in Nicaragua, apparently. So go figure. So that's been what I've been doing. But I think my interest in this area is really around how this, in particular when it comes to voice, but more broadly when you talk about the idea of virtual assistants, will change the way in which fundamentally the next generation will engage with technology, and it will become their primary interface, or one of their primary interfaces, as we were discussing earlier about that reverse bell curve kind of problem of input and output methods. So that's what I've been doing up until now.
So I'll kick off a few questions. I guess really controversially, what are you going to do next? And are you allowed to share this? I know you do this podcast, but maybe you can enlighten us a little bit more, because LEGO must be quite a cool place to work. But yeah, what are you going to do?
Well, what I'm going to do is essentially charge all of you lots of consulting money and then kind of make an exit and go live in the Bahamas. No, I think what I'm going to do is continue for the next few months. We see is really kind of pushing this voice community. So one of the things that we've seen is that, much like, you guys probably feel this as well, right? So did anyone work in social media marketing before they realised that voice was cool as well? Yeah, a couple of you, right? So about 10 years ago, this is kind of what it felt like at the early dawn of kind of doing social media. We were working in kind of social agencies or whatever. That's where I came from. So in 2008, I started at OLV, the advertising agency, building the first social media practice within their business here in the UK. And it felt like this. It felt like small rooms of people, particularly here in the UK, coming around tables, not necessarily underneath chandeliers, but usually in pubs, kind of talking about this thing called Twitter and why it was interesting, and like being recognised by people on the street by your like Twitter bio photo, which is all very odd. And I feel like the voice industry is maybe there at this juncture, but I don't think it's going to take as long as it took social to become the mainstay as voice is going to. And I think we all know that that's because this isn't something that's just being adopted by millennial hacks that are interested in journalism and shouting at Trump. I think that they are, we see these devices being adopted by all age demographics at the young end and the old, because it is the most natural way of interfacing with technology, the internet. And that IoT, whilst is very focused on these small boxes with kind of these anthropomorphized women put into indebted servitude in them, that actually IoT is far more than that. I've got a 3.5-year-old. Has anyone got kids in preschool age? Yeah. Okay, fine. So you've all had the experience of one of them shouting to get the Moana soundtrack out of Spotify in your living room. Mine's very good at it. She's gotten very good at it over recent years. But the point is that to her, that there's no such thing as the Internet of Things. There are just things. The Internet is a completely nascent concept to her. And actually, for all young people, in that category, but certainly those under the age of 11, there is no like the internet just isn't a thing. They know what Wi-Fi is, but that's whether or not Wi-Fi is working or not has nothing really to do with the internet. So those of us that maybe have worked in telcos or remember what it was like to try and kind of get kind of the front page of the Sun, or depending on which page you're looking for, on a 56k modem, kind of 1998, that was a bit of a different situation. And I think the thing that I'm really passionate about, asking the original question is, well, what am I going to do next, is I think to try and help us work out what the right way of using these things is. Because actually we leave it just up to the device manufacturers, to the big five guys who are making these platforms, we may end up with a world that we don't really want. And I think that is a dangerous thing for us to just kind of leave to happen. I think we need to think much more about artificial empathy than artificial intelligence, and building platforms that have empathy, that actually teach young people in particular the right way to use these technologies, so that in the years to come, when they cannot discern from a real voice or a synthesized one, when they pick up the phone, which I'm doing this hand action for those who cannot see it for whatever reason, of holding my thumb and finger up to my face, to signify a phone, is like, well, they'll never do that ever again anyway. So whenever they talk to customer services and they don't know whether it's a human at the other end, you want to make sure that they treat them well. And that's why you see things like Google Duplex and others putting in ums and ers and pauses and thank yous, and making sure that kids say please to Alexa, because if they don't learn how to do that now, 10 years from now, unless we all want to become Netflix watching automatons, they're not going to be able to interact in civil society. So that's what I'm excited about kind of working on.
So two questions in one here. One is, what do you think to Microsoft, which is the open source virtual assistant, course assistant, but also do you think websites will disappear?
As long as we have eyes, I think we'll have websites for a while, but I think the idea that the visual interface and the audio interface, as we've already heard today, have to be kind of interoperable. But we need visuals are very good for certain things. We talked about lists and kind of navigation, and most of us quite like pictures. So I don't think screens are kind of disappearing necessarily from the way that we interact with systems. I think it's about learning to live with those things together. I think it'll be interesting that we've talked an awful lot about kind of the big systems. Assistant, Cortana, Siri, Alexa, there may be some men that enter the fray at some point or other, those poor ladies, which I think is a real problem actually, for those of us that have kind of gotten used to barking commands at typically a woman's voice in the corner of the room. I think is an issue, but a slight aside one. So I think that we will continue to have screens. I think we'll see new entrants doing new discrete services. I think if you are already using voice control in Spotify on the Android platform, or if you have had an attempt at using Alexa in the context of Fire TV, for example, then you're going to start to see different use cases of these assistants. Most people haven't heard anyone say anything about Roku today, but Roku is in more it's the most dominant television platform in the world now. There are more TVs in the US than any other basic platform there in terms of smart televisions, including Samsung, because of the deal that they've done with what's TPL and a couple of others that in the US, and they're building voice control for kind of the television, which is obviously still the dominant screen and still occupies most screen time in the home in most Western markets. So this will be kind of multiple assistants talking to one another and interoperability to them, and that's where open source actually could become an interesting part for us.
Let me go down the back. Piers, would you like to ask questions? Or let's get some questions from the audience, if you will. But just, we are rounding up now, so let's have some poignant questions and some challenge for James. JP, go easy on him there.
Don't, it's fine. I've got nothing to lose now.
Talking the role of voice in learning, and obviously Lego has been pretty involved in the whole learning process. How do you see that playing out?
I can stand, but I'll just stand and shout it. You're not recording it, right?
I don't know, well, yes.
Okay, fine. It's not microphone. The role of, I think voice in the learning context, it depends on where you're choosing to learn, right? So, voice in the classroom, has its part to play, but at the moment, most of the devices that we have, or even cluster microphones that are positioned, kind of around the classroom in terms of being able to detect individual children, or kind of that classroom environment is still a good 5 to 10 years away in terms of the kind of the accuracy of the technology. Some others may debate on how long that is, but crystal ball, let's say that there's at least 5 years worth of work to get done there without it being, or at least for it to be at a level where the average school could afford to put it in, which is an even longer term question. I think what's more interesting is the idea of assistance in the classroom. Voice being maybe an input method for that, either discreetly on a Chromebook, for example, in front of a child, or via a phone, or whatever it might be, but voice is an input. But assistance in the classroom, I think, is where we see really interesting, how many of you experienced a small paperclip teaching you how to use Word a decade ago, right? That's the first version of that. Assistance in the classroom, virtual assistance in the classroom started with Clippy. What will be the next version of it? It might be Alexa for schools. It might be Cortana for the classroom. In fact, it actually probably will be Cortana than anything else, just because of, again, potentially Microsoft dominance paired with, Google Assistant for the classroom could also be a really interesting paradigm. But I think if you look at, we were just having this discussion up here about, what Microsoft's role in this, both in the enterprise, between Microsoft Education, between their ownership of LinkedIn, and now, the LinkedIn learning programs, their use of the HoloLens and the various augmented reality technologies, and then Cortana. If you collapse that into a single stack and talk about education, they've probably got the most dominance in the classroom at the moment. I think you could see similar entrants if Apple manages to scale the iPad initiatives that it's running in the US, that Siri could also begin to have that. In terms of shortcutting classrooms, we talked about Siri shortcuts earlier, in terms of making learning journeys easier for children in particular. But assistance overall, in education, there's a really interesting kind of government regulation kind of question for us, both here in the UK and particularly in the US, where obviously school governance is much more disaggregated than it is in the UK, where actually having big corporate entities coming into the classrooms and having an ownership of a massive amount of data over a children's learning journey and even into adult education may actually be a policy problem that makes that not possible. Because when it comes down to it, is that education, like with healthcare data or any other kind of personal records like a passport, is ultimately another store of identity, it's another store of value, your education records. And so you have to choose which one of those big entities you're going to trust to put that into. What interoperability do you want that to have? Can you take it with you? Can you leave the system? The right to be forgotten, etc. Kind of begins to play into all of that discussion as well. So I think we will see assistance at the edge in the devices, absolutely, in terms of shortcutting learning journeys, in terms of making data more structured and more easily accessible at the edge, probably on device, discreetly in the classroom. But in terms of the role that the assistant can play in terms of having a continuous learning journey with an individual child over time, that might be harder to get to.
More questions? Have you got the microphones?
I'm just curious, what's the implication for social media and social media experience using?
I mean, how many of you like using social media anymore? Is probably the question I'd ask back. I don't think that voice necessarily is the thing that's going to tear down social media. I think they're doing a pretty good job of it themselves. Right? Just to be honest. I think that the interesting part that voice maybe has to play in social media is that voice communication is the ultimate social network. It's what every other social network's ever been built on. It's just that it happens to be done in physical spaces like this. Like the voice is what we use, and it's the most authentic way of communicating. We all know that text-based social networking is terrible for empathy, it's terrible for interpretation. It loses massive amounts of what can be communicated through other media. And I think that actually, if you look at the rise of podcasting in particular, as now becoming such a dominant means of disseminating information, and actually in a different way to radio previously. And my background, if you go way back, is in radio. I launched a podcast production company in 2007. That was probably too early. Serial hadn't kind of come along and done the job for me at that point. But what was interesting when you look at those, particularly podcasting where it is at the moment, is that communities of interest are sprouting up around podcasts all the time. If I look into this room to ask you, has anyone listened to Hello from the Magic Tavern? No? Okay, let's try another one. Reply All? The Daily? Do any of you listen to podcasts? How can I have not this many people in a room about this and not have anyone listen to the shows? What about Homecoming? Has anyone listened to that?
S-Town, Serial, these are all just recommendations. Okay, fine. Serial, good, okay, fine. You all listen to Serial and then stop listening to anything else. But if you had a conversation with someone that's listened to Serial, suddenly something kind of goes off, and all that was a story that you listened to on your headphones. And so it just shows the power that actually voice communication, the audio-based storytelling in particular, has in order to be able to develop empathy. And we can't do social without empathy, right? It's like, how many of you have been on a bad corporate away day or retreat in the past 5 years? Right? What did you do? Charles, what did you do on a bad corporate retreat?
I got drunk.
What did you do before that? You must have done. What was the forced fun things upon one another?
I think we got go-karting.
Go-karting, excellent. Anyone else?
We had to, we did like plan the next few years out in business terms, just a previous job, and then we had to make music, which for the ones of us who couldn't make any music was
horrendous.
horrific.
Right. Yeah. So we inflict these things upon one another, right, within kind of corporate settings, because there's a reason why we do it, and the reason why we do it is that otherwise, when you go drinking at the pub, all you'll talk about is work. Whereas if you force fun upon one another, like, abseiling with Malcolm from accounting, or you're kind of going and mocktail making with Milton Keynes, like whatever it might be, like when you do those things, it gives you something else to talk about in the pub other than that. And that's because play brings empathy, and empathy allows you to be social, right? And so we have to, for social to survive, social media, social networking to survive, I think, is that we have to find other ways of it becoming a more playful medium. And that doesn't mean playing games necessarily, although it might be that. And look at the uses of these things as that outside of listening to content, the next thing that people do with them is play games with them. But actually, is that play in all senses of either doing something creative, like music making, or competitive, like go-karting, or something kind of compository in terms of like writing music or telling a story or doing some other horrendous narrative team building thing. Those things are all forms of play that break down empathy goals and ultimately give you the ability to have a social experience with one another. And so these things may allow you to do that in a different way, because actually when you give people their ability to share their voice, but not have to worry about what they look like when they're doing it, it's actually a very empathetic medium, which might allow you to connect with one another in a different way. So I think if you look at startups like Anchor, for example, in the podcasting space, which originally started as an audio social network and realised that they had developed the best way of making podcasts on a phone ever done before, and now it's just a podcasting network. Sadly, in many ways, in my opinion, having spoken with them, I think it's that actually they should do a lot more in the audio networking thing. I think there's some really interesting things there. A number of startups doing this. Those of you that listen to Kane's podcast, the VUXL podcast, he's interviewed a couple of people in the past couple of weeks who are doing audio social networks, and I think actually they provide potentially a very interesting way forward for social networking. Look at LinkedIn introducing voice messaging. Look at what my American friends send me voice memos on WhatsApp all the bloody time, right? But we don't do it in the UK because we're kind of stoic. But like they do it because they're more American, and so and so they do it. Sorry, Americans in the room. It's true because in America, it's more socially acceptable. And someone else made the comparison earlier that in most Asian markets that's also true because of the kind of. But it's driven by something else. In America, it's driven by kind of cultural association and cultural capital. In Asia, it's driven by kind of UX issues of the non-Roman-based character languages. So there are different reasons. We unfortunately sit in Greenwich Mean Time where we're just mean all the time, and that's thanks. I quite like that joke.
What do you
Okay.
You've got a microphone there.
So we all came here today to get more excited about voice, and then go to someone else this evening or tomorrow and get them really excited about voice. If you were to get us one thing to look at, to go and get someone else excited, who's doing really good skills or really good voice experiences that we can use as a reference point?
Can't give one distinct answer to anyone who's seeing. If you've got someone who's got content that they want to get out there, I would definitely go look at. There's a startup in New Jersey called Earplay. Come across them before. Some of you might have come across them. They're making really good interactive storytelling skills. They did one for Jurassic World. They did the one for Mr. Robot for Amazon Prime. And they're using some of the latest in US only Amazon Pay enabled upsell technology, where you can sell the first chapter of something and then creatively get people to buy subsequent chapters, which is generating an actually audio-based e-commerce model, which is really interesting. So I checked those guys out. What I think is the name of you'll probably tell me the name of the skill, which I've now forgotten, by our friends who just launched it at World Mental Health Day yesterday, Mindspace.
Headspace?
No, not Headspace, although they are doing very good stuff in this space as well, but no, Mindscape maybe it was yesterday that launched. I'm just going to find you the name of it now. I'm going to the WhatsApp group, which you should all join. Just drop that in there.
How do we join it?
I'm going to come around with a QR code. Anyway, I think it's called Mindscape, but a mindfulness skill that you can kind of play back through your smart speaker, I think is mindfulness audio, definitely an interesting one to pay attention to there. Most of the skills, to be honest, isn't actually the area that I think I'm most interested in. I think actually if you look into, for example, the Alexa for Business kind of context, that's where the really interesting stuff is happening. Being able to do stuff that's discreetly device-based within an ecosystem like a hotel. So like if you look at what Marriott has just done with partnering with Alexa for Business inside Marriott hotels, that excites me because anyone that's got real estate that wants to do that. Amazon themselves for Amazon for Business just released a meetings skill yesterday to be able to book meetings in your office, which is pretty smart as well. And I think actually doing it within those kind of discrete infrastructures, either in hotels or in offices or in schools, for example, as we mentioned. I do a lot of work with Church of England. They've got a very good Church of England skill. You can get daily prayer, you can get the prayer for the Eucharist, you can pray, all those kind of things, but you can also kind of call a Bible verse or whatever it might be if you want to do that. But what I've been challenging them to do is also think about, we've got 18,000 churches across the country, most of them are empty, kind of 6 days in the week. And some of them have people in them waiting for people to come in who want to just visit, kind of the building. If you own a building that has visitors and you don't want to have a receptionist paying for the whole time, then put an Alexa there with a cue card of things you can ask and stand up the skill discreetly for that building. I mean, that's the smart thing I'm doing about how to space like private members club, for example, or a hotel.
And just more questions then. It will be another 5-10 minutes and then we'll be clearing off.
I will just keep talking.
Yeah, it's good insights. So, what's going on with Apple? Because they seem to be slowing down the momentum around what they're doing in space. What do you see happening with the big tech players? What's going on with Apple and other players? How do you see it playing out in the next year or two? I know we've asked that question to other people.
No.
That's to you, Jim.
This time. Is this better?
Oh, yes.
Better? Worse? It's fine. You can hear me either way. I tend to be loud and fast. I've been doing public speaking for about 15 years, and people always tell me, man, you speak fast, and I've never got any slower. So I don't expect it to change anytime soon, so there we are. What's going on with the big guys? I think that in Asia, Samsung are quietly starting a revolution with Bixby that no one's paying attention to. I think in China, WeChat voice messaging is just everything, and they own everything. And the idea that now the government is not only literally listening to you, but kind of reading everything is definitely an interesting problem. In the Western world, although we can actually do anything about it, depending on your worldview, I think Google have a very interesting opportunity. I think the Pixel announcements this week show that they have really begun to think quite seriously about industrial design, and that they actually have paid more attention than they have done in previous iterations of both the Pixel phone, obviously, which is the primary kind of demonstration of the purest version of what the assistant is, through to Google Home, and now Google Home, what's the one with the screen called, the Hub, they launched this week. I think that they've got an interesting insight into the role that these things will play within the family unit and within the home. And I think that the sooner, or whoever, and they have the unique ability to do that, because whilst Amazon has a lot of data on the primary Amazon account holder in the household about what they purchased for the household, which you can infer a lot from, right? If you buy a lot of nappies and wipes, then you've probably got kids of a certain age. If you buy a lot of nappies and wipes for, kind of a much older generation, you're a different person. Right, so you can learn a lot from purchase behaviour, but Google has everything else. And not only have they got everything else, but they've got everything else, and everyone in the household has a discrete account that can be detected. And so when they begin to actually be able to do distinct voice differentiation between family members within the household, whether that's a Google Kids account to be able to do something for the kid in the bedroom versus the adult that is in the kitchen, with a screen as well as also just audio, then they may win. Amazon are winning at the moment because they literally will design anything and put it in front of anybody and tell them to buy it and keep buying it and just keep making it cheaper until someone bought one. And they also will disaggregate every other FMCG product that is out there, and that's actually the real play with those things, which is just, you know, if you're Duracell, Dove, or any other commodity brands that, you know, Amazon, that people purchase through Amazon, you should probably be quite worried. But, you know, on the other side of it, I think that's where Facebook, I mentioned before.
Yeah, Facebook, go on, yeah.
I mean, you know, good idea, catastrophic timing. Just absolutely, like breaching 90 million accounts and then releasing a camera that tracks you around the living room. I just don't see how they're going to kind of sell that through. I think that the trust has been royally lost in the US, in particular after Zuckerberg went in front of the kind of Congress, and I think that he's not done himself any favours in Europe either. So how that they maintain that, I think that their one saving grace, and where my prediction could fail, is that Alexa is inside the thing, and that they're saying that the data is passed through that, but ultimately it's still using Facebook Messenger as the primary video delivery service, even though they don't say that it is, but it is, and it is in the core of what that device is, and I just don't see people wanting it. Also, it's just ugly. I mean, have you seen this thing? No? The Facebook thing?
Follows you around that.
I mean, the device itself is just ugly. You just wouldn't want one on the table.
On ethics, because we showcased earlier the emojis on SoundBranch and sentiment analysis, but there's an ethical question as to who should see that, the state of mind of the person, human rights, privacy. Talk to me around sort of what should be allowed, what shouldn't be allowed, that sort of thing. Sentiment analysis, AI, what's right, what's wrong. I mean, obviously the Church of England have a view on that. You have your own opinion. Talk us through as you navigate AI and voice and what should be allowed and what should be disallowed ethically as computers are programmed. What are you thinking? Tricky one.
I think it comes back to the question of what we want to do with our identities online. I think ultimately. You look at the reaction in the UK, and you go even harder if you go to kind of other parts of Western Europe around the idea of ID cards and how vehemently opposed many markets were to that, which is a government piece of data that they hold all that data on you pretty much anyway. They just want to put it in a physical card that they make you carry around. I mean, we're carrying around a digital version of it all the time, and none of us get very upset about that. It's just that we're giving it over to a corporate institution with a benevolent dictator that's running it rather than worrying about the government watching us. I'm far more scared about them having it than Theresa May right now. But anyway. So I think the question is about how comfortable we can get with giving up more and more of our personal data. I think we are hitting a tipping point where certain segments of society over the age of 35 are getting a little bit nervous about it. I think that those under the age of 21 have never known anything different, and so therefore their propensity to just continue to give it up in the search of utility and convenience is something that we should actually be probably quite worried about. And I think it's going to come to bear first of all in the workplace, because we've got a really interesting generational problem going on right now. That for the first time in human history, there are 4 different generational cohorts occupying the workspace at the same time. The boomers at the top end with all the money, the Gen Xers who are disenfranchised but have to run the companies, the Gen Ys who are in the middle management who are really pissed off that they didn't get better jobs, and the Gen Z that don't want to work for anybody, they want to work for themselves. And all 4 of them, because of ageing populations and because of younger access to the workforce through the gig economy, means that all 4 of them are operating in a company at the same time. That's never happened before in human history, certainly not in the modern era. And so that presents one of the most interesting data issues ever, because the Gen Xers and up were taught that basically structure was the way in which you worked. Email actually was a very good system for them because it had an inbox and an outbox. It was very easy to manage. And Gen Y and Gen Z have come in where serendipity is the thing that they're after, that they might scroll to the left or swipe to the right and they can either get kind of someone to date on one side or an Uber Eats order on the other. And so serendipity is the thing that they're after, and they're the Slack generation where everything goes. And they're in the knowledge economy where they've been taught that actually efficiency looks like how fast you can move information around, not how long you can focus on something. And so that generational paradigm, when you then would also layer on top the idea of what does it mean to be online? What does it mean to put my data out there into the world? It means fundamentally different things to those either side of that kind of rough 35 through 40 age bracket. And so the challenge for us, and I'll end on this because I've talked way too long at all of you and I don't want to pay more to sleep, but the challenge is for those of us on one side of that generational divide to make sure that we articulate what it was like before all of this happened to those on the other side of the generational divide before they go too far down the line to be able to retreat. Because actually, the right to be forgotten is one thing, the ability to be forgotten is a very different one. And yes, they all have a right to it, but not many of them actually know how to have the ability to do it. And so that will be the big question. The blockchain, and just to hit all the buzzwords in one after me, the blockchain, regardless of whether or not you think, kind of like Bitcoin and Ethereum are going down the toilet, which they are, but outside of cryptocurrency, the blockchain potentially could be the one saving grace option if we could come to some consensus model around what it means to have digital identity. If you can find a true open source disaggregated digital identity that is not owned by a single institution but is interoperable with all of these systems and systems, then you maybe could get to something that could work for the common good. But you have to sell the promise of that to a generation that ultimately doesn't really want it, it's too much work. And that's where I'm a bit worried. So that's where I think there's something for us to ruminate on. And yeah, maybe they'll get to it via voice. I've said enough. Thanks.